Now, when we picketed Alan Pope that day, we began a new relationship with him. At that point, he was pro-abortion. He was not on the page of a culture of life. But over the weeks and months and years later, through entering into relationship, into discussion, into dialogue with him, his position on life issues began to change. And it goes to show the power that we have to change the hearts and minds of politicians and of people throughout our country. That when we work with them, when we share the knowledge we have with them, how can their hearts not be changed and transformed to embrace a culture of life? But it doesn't happen overnight. It takes time. It takes effort. It takes persistence. But when we do those things, great and wonderful things can happen. And so as a young person, I learned very quickly the difference that one person and a small group of people could make. A few months after we had picketed Alan Pope, we were now in midst of a provincial election. And it just so happened one day that Bob Rae, who at that moment was wearing an NDP pro-abortion hat, happened to be visiting our community. I found myself at the campaign office of the local man that was running for the NDP position. And so I went and I decided that I would ask Mr. Rae a question. I didn't know what was going to happen in the midst of it, but here I was, a young person of 15, 16 years old, in the midst of a mostly older packed room. And all of a sudden, I happened to have this chance to be face-to-face with Bob Rae. The national media happened to be there that I was completely oblivious about. And I just turned to Mr. Rae and I said to him, Mr. Rae, why do you believe that it's okay to kill unborn children? He gave me some type of pat answer and I was quickly kind of pushed aside. I went home that day not thinking anything more of it. The next day, I get this phone call from Jim Hughes. And he says to me, John, what the hell did you do yesterday? I'm thinking, oh my God, I did something bad. The pro-life movement's going to hate me. I must have screwed up somehow. And I said, well, I just talked to Bob Rae. He says, do you realize that you're on the front page of the Toronto Star and that we keep hearing your clip on CBC radio? I was completely oblivious to all of this, but it went to show that one person, one innocent question can make a difference. So often as young people, we think, how can I make a difference? I don't have a lot of money. I don't have a lot of power. I don't have a lot of clout, but we can make a difference. And by asking that simple question that day to Mr. Rae, it brought an awareness to other people of the position of the ND Party and how they were pro-abortion and how we could not support them. And so it goes to show that we can and must make a difference to be able to build a culture of life. And I want to spend now just a few moments this morning talking about how you, as young people, can make a difference in your high school, in your university, in your church, in your community, in your circle of friends. And how do we go about doing this? It's not rocket science. You don't need to have a degree. You don't need to be a member of parliament. You don't need to have a lot of money. But what we can and must do is share our story with others and help others to understand the issues of life and the urgency for them to be involved in building a culture of life moment by moment, day by day. As we will go home this afternoon, back to our schools, back to our families, back to our communities, we need to share what it was that we experienced here. And when we share our stories, when we tell people in our schools on Monday, or in our churches on Sunday, or our friends on the weekend, what it was like to be at the Basilica yesterday morning, to be surrounded by a dozen bishops from across Canada, to be surrounded by 1,200 other people that believe in life and believe in Jesus Christ, we become witnesses and evangelizers. As you begin to share what happened at the March for Life yesterday, How in the midst of the rain and the wind and the jeers of a few outdated and outspoken people, we can witness to the great gift of life when we talk about how we marched proudly on the streets of Ottawa to denounce abortion, to speak about life, and to show that 12,000 of us are committed to the cause of building a new civilization of life and love. As you share what you've experienced last night at the Rose Dinner, what you've experienced through these workshops today, you realize and I realize that we are not alone. Much in our secular media today wants to tell us that the pro-life movement is just a movement of a few priests, a few nuns, and a bunch of gray-haired old ladies and men. But you and I know the truth and the reality that the pro-life movement today is more alive than it has ever been. And it is alive and vibrant because of young people like yourselves that have come to this week to be able to celebrate the gift of life and to commit yourselves to building that new culture of life and love in your schools, in your churches, and in your communities. We have much to be able to celebrate. We have much to rejoice, and we have much to be proud of. The work that is being done in high schools, in university campuses, and on Parliament Hill is what is happening to bring about this change, this transformation in our society today. And much of that credit goes to young people just like yourselves, and young people like myself and Alex who have grown up in the pro-life movement and are trying still 25 years later to work at building this civilization of life and love. And so the first task that I invite and that I challenge you to is to be able to share your stories this week when you go home of what it was like to be here and what it was like to be immersed in this culture of life and love. In spite of the heavy issues that we deal with, abortion, euthanasia, assisted suicide, embryonic stem research, we have a joy within our hearts and our lives. There is an enthusiasm that we have experienced here, but we must not allow that energy, that enthusiasm to die when we get onto our buses and go back to our schools and our communities. But the first task, if we want to help recreate a new civilization, a new culture of life, is to be able to share our stories and to educate others about the life issues. Once we share that joy, once we share that knowledge, then we must do something with that. As St. Paul tells us in one of his letters in the New Testament, that we must be doers of the word and not merely hearers. We cannot just take the knowledge that we have learned here and the experience that we have had here and do nothing with it when we go back to our schools, to our universities, and to our communities. But now we must do something. And what is that doing that we must be involved in? It is none other than political activity. It is none other than trying to make a difference with our politicians that will enact laws and legislation that will protect human life from the moment of conception to natural death. And so